Drink the Nation is a podcast for thoughtful, informed adults, preferably with a pour in hand. The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the hosts and guests only and do not reflect the views of any employers, institutions, licensing boards, government agencies, bourbon distilleries, or family members, especially our family members. They've asked us to be very clear about that. This show is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said here should be taken as medical, psychiatric, legal, or professional advice. If you're in crisis, call a professional. If you're mad at something we said, we suggest journaling or emailing us with civility. We're here to challenge ideas, not diagnose strangers. We're clinicians, not your clinicians, and we have the bourbon to prove it. Let's go. Welcome back to Shrink the Nation. Tonight, we're doing a consult on a missing patient. Uncle Sam didn't make the appointment, but the chart is thick. Chief complaint, I don't blush anymore. Translation, country's old regulators, shame and guilt, aren't doing their jobs. Let's set terms in plain English. Shame says, I'm bad. Guilt says, I did a bad thing. Healthy people in healthy countries don't need more humiliation. They need guilt that leads to repair. I did it. Here's who I hurt. Here's how I fix it. Here's how I change. What we're seeing right now looks like shame dysregulation. In private, lots of us are drowning in comparison and anxiety. That's shame turn inward. In public, the incentives flip. Doubling down gets you clicks. Riding out scandal beats stepping down. And if your team still cheers, you don't feel the sting. Tonight, Robbie and I are putting America on the proverbial couch. We're going to talk about why the blush faded, attention economics, polarization, scandal fatigue, and how that shows up in our feeds, our politics, and our own choices to overshare at 2 a.m. and regret it by 8. This is not a scolding. It's a treatment plan. We'll translate the psychodynamics into normal language, pull a few receipts from culture and history, and then with prescriptions you can actually use, personally and nationally. Less spectacle, more repair. Fewer victory laps, more accountability with a path back. If you've ever deleted a post, winced at an apology video, or wished our leaders could say, I did it, here's how I'll make it right, you're listening to the right station. Pour something, settle in. But before we open the chart on Uncle Sam and get to work, let's get our introductions out of the way. I'm David, dual-boarded psychiatrist here, 20 plus years in the military. Robbie, because we're doing the old shame show. Nothing says shame and guilt. A Crow 86 in a plastic cup.
Absolutely.
The big brother to Old Crow, slightly fancier, aged a little bit longer, I believe 4 years, and tastes pretty much the damn same, which has that overnight, spent the night behind a dumpster in an alley.
In an alley.
Kind of taste to it.
Warming myself to the dumpster fire.
That's
fighting
what it is,
off raccoons.
Sleeping on my
I have to
my
admit,
cardboard box.
I've never had that one. I've never even seen that available in a fine retail establishment. Look at that. Yeah. It's gorgeous.
If you're going to drink Old Crow, sometimes you got to fancy it up,
Right.
It's like the banquet beer.
You see 86 and you got to assume they mean 1886, but I think they're meaning 1986.
No, actually they mean proof. 86 proof is what they mean. I believe the original is 80 proof. Yeah, It's 86 proof. You take Old Crow and you make it a smidge fancier.
Yeah.
You age it for another year. Right. I think what they do is after the Old Crow bottles have sat out on the shelf for a whole year, they recollect them.
Pour them into a new bottle.
No, they just put a new label. They ain't rebottle it. They just put a new label on it.
They don't even go to the trouble.
You got yourself Crow 86, yeah.
You really sold it there. I'm sure the fine folks at Jim Beam Distillery are going to be seeking us.
Well, hey, if they want to...
Maybe for assassination.
I'd pay my $19 for this giant bottle. This is... Look at the size of this. This is almost there's no way I'm going to get through that.
Is it plastic?
It is plastic. It's a giant plastic bottle.
Yeah, of course it is.
It's where dreams are made and destroyed in the same night.
Yeah, smells of bourbon and bad decisions. All right, hey, I'm Rob. Lots of time in the military, lots of time in psychiatry, and it's only getting more. I am drinking Horse Soldiers this fine evening, largely because it's got a cool story. It's a distillery that was started by some of the original initial special forces folks that went into Afghanistan and rode around Afghanistan with the Northern Alliance on horses. So they won me over. As it turns out, it tastes like a bourbon. Surprise.
Yeah, this one does too. It just doesn't taste like good bourbon. It's starting to.
You drink enough of it, they all taste the same.
Yeah, it's starting to get there.
This one does have the quality of a finished bourbon. It has been appropriately aged, and you can tell they put some time into this one.
Well, aren't you special?
Yeah.
Here I am really embracing shame and guilt with the...
I didn't think about... Well, okay, my shame My shame is spending the money I spent on this bottle. How about that?
There you go.
That
There you go.
that is a shame. I tripled or quadrupled the amount that I normally would limit myself to a bottle of bourbon.
Well, touche. Touche. All right.
Yeah.
Well done then. Okay. Well, we've got Uncle Sam on the couch. Uncle Sam is struggling, and it's been a while. If we look at the research that's been done into this since the 1970s, what has been seen is that fewer and fewer politicians have been resigning in shame, but the scandals haven't really decreased. That says something, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And this shamelessness, there's two bits of research that started in the late 70s and have moved forward. And that's the advent and increase of narcissism and the increase of shamelessness. And I don't think that's a surprise, actually, when we step back from it, that has happened. Before we really dig into this, though, I have to tell a quick story about what made me want to do this episode. So a couple of years ago, I was deployed and I was really hard up for things to do. I watched a documentary on public health efforts in Africa.
That is hard up. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure everybody would have, flipping through and seen it and like, oh, yes, I have to watch this. I got to figure out what the cutting edge is on the public health efforts in Africa. But this one was specifically about public toilets. That much of Africa, public toilets or toilets in general, are not the norm in many of their villages, and they have a real problem with GI-borne illnesses. They built public restrooms. They were making this push for people to utilize them. It was an English documentarian, but they were speaking whatever native language they were speaking, so I had no idea what they were saying to each other. But they went to this village, and they were touting what they had done, but somebody came running in and was like, hey, someone took a shit in the woods. At least in my mind, that's what I said.
Was it a bear?
Maybe. But this woman that come running in and she was mad and she was pointing over her shoulder. Basically, they cleaned it up and said that in the midst of this, a villager reveals that someone had defecated in the woods near the village. This is what they're trying to avoid. Somehow, through some crazy forensics, I don't know how they did this, but they identified who the culprit was.
Could you imagine being on that forensic team? What science went into?
Right. I think a stick was involved.
Wasn't this an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
I don't know.
There was a
I've
whole
never
episode
watched
called
that.
Poop Hoop to the Bed.
I'm not.
It's one of their best
I'm not.
episodes.
Well, I do have some time on my hands, so maybe I'll start that. But at any rate, somehow through the magic of divination, I'm sure there was some stick poking into the feces, maybe a finger, I don't know. But they identified who the culprit was. And then they publicly shamed this woman who looked like a very reasonable, nice lady, middle-aged lady. But they publicly shamed her, and she cried and cried and cried and cried. So it made me interested in the role of shame to a society, that societies rely on shame to enforce their social norms. And it led me to the writing of a guy named Thomas Sheff, a sociologist who, from the last century, actually just died, I think, earlier this year. But he was a sociologist who, interestingly, started with individual emotion and then built towards society. Certainly, when I initially read it, it didn't resonate as much. Resonates a great deal with me now because that's exactly what we're doing or trying to. And he actually wrote extensively on shame as the social glue. So it's the duct tape that holds this airplane that we're building as we fly it together, the democracy that we have. And lately, the last X number of years, I have been flummoxed by this sense that shame has died, and we don't even go visit its gravesite anymore. We don't even put flowers. I've not went and cut the grass at the gravesite at all. So we do not even look at it any longer. Anyway, I started thinking, starting from the individual and building up, and that's kind of what drove my interest on this one. Shit in the woods is what drove my interest.
I still want to know how they figured it out.
I don't know.
There was
Unless
a lab involved. Very specific lab.
Imagine she was fearful that maybe the village witch doctor could divine it. So I don't know. I really don't know. But and of course, they didn't really go into great detail. They just said they identified the culprit. And then they shamed her.
We figured it out. Shame and guilt, alluded to it in the opening. There's a difference between the two. For our purposes, maybe it's be helpful to sort of define them at the personal level and then maybe at the national level. why that matters for the discussion. As psychiatrists, what we're interested in seeing in an individual may not necessarily be the same thing that you want to see at that national level as far as how shame is used.
Right. So in our line of work, guilt is a criteria of depression, excessive guilt. Now, I wish when they were writing up the criteria, they would have used the term shame rather than guilt because I think it conveys something. There's a different connotation. So shame, and as you stated, shame is I am bad. Whereas guilt is, I did a bad thing. I mean, there's an important distinction there. And from a mental health standpoint, we deal with excessive shame and excessive guilt, and it's clinically relevant. But from a human standpoint, there is a healthy level of shame that regulates behaviors, that it's the regulator that kicks in when we're alone and no one's watching us. And it keeps us on the straight and narrow. And it also certainly enforces societal norms. So it determines those whose behaviors fall in the in group versus those whose behaviors fall in the out group. And to stay in that in group, which at a certain point in human history meant survival or not. And I wish Keith was here because he said it in a very lovely way the last episode, that we are individuals who require a group in order to survive. And that group requirement is where shame comes in. Shame kept us within the norm so that we were not ostracized from the group. It is important, but the connotation of shame, maybe to the lay person, or if you don't think your way through it, you might think shame's bad always.
When we think about shame and guilt, I sort of lean towards guilt being the more preferable of the two, but shame still having its role, especially in the early development in small doses and very small doses throughout development. Shame or that embarrassment after wrongdoing can help you to internalize the societal norms that helps you build a conscience. But when you get excessive shame or it becomes weaponized, it becomes toxic. And that's when you start having somebody having that flooding of feelings of worthlessness and inadequacy with too much shame. Now, on the other side, what we've seen is that people who are prone to more guilt, which is being able to identify that I've done something bad, but not shame, tend to have higher empathy and maybe better relationship skills, lower risk of psychological problems. That is the development of more mature version of shame over time to recognize, yeah, we do bad things at times. It doesn't necessarily make me bad always, as long as I'm willing to work through that and willing to address it, see how it's hurt people, and being willing to change. There is a problem in somebody who gets to the point of having no guilt, but being able to say, well, I did something wrong. I'll keep doing it.
Well, I don't think they'd say I did something wrong. They would not recognize it as wrong. If you have no shame,
they might say it's wrong. A good example are the CEO apologies that we're kind of getting used to. We apologize if we may have offended somebody.
Yeah.
Which is,
we're sorry you feel that way.
We're sorry that somebody was offended by us. We're not sorry we did it, so we're not going to stop doing it, but we are sorry that we looked bad for a period of time, and please keep buying our product. That's what I mean.
Going back to that distinction between shame and guilt, because they are often used interchangeably, and they're not. They're different concepts, and I think you just said it beautifully, and I think it bears repeating, that guilt is an admission of wrongdoing. And if you can do that, then at least it gives you a path to make amends and to not make the same mistakes. We are human, and human frailty is built into us. So those who have a good sense of twinship, which we need like some sound effect every time jargon gets thrown out.
Yeah, no, you need to define that.
Yeah. So twinship comes from a guy named Kohut. I cannot think of his first name off the top of my head, but can you? Is it Walter? Anyway, Kohut.
Old Johnny Kohut.
Yeah. All right, Johnny Kohut. Johnny Kohut, who developed...
It's Heinz Kohut.
Heinz, okay.
We were close, though. I mean, Walter and Johnny. I mean, his parents probably thought they were considering Johnny.
It was on the short
Walter,
list.
I know. Yeah, it was probably middle name. Heinz.
Yeah.
Heinz Walter Johnny Kohut.
Yeah.
Johnny
That's
Walter.
him. Yeah. So he developed self-psychology, and without killing too much time going through all the factors that he felt was necessary for a healthy adult personality, one of those factors was a concept called twinship, which is the idea that I am more similar to other humans than I am dissimilar from them. In other words, all the crazy shit that comes through my head, all the thoughts that I think that I would utterly be ashamed of, well, everyone else is thinking them too. That it is a very most of the experiences humans have is shared by other humans. And we get that usually in our formative years by having our emotions validated, given permission to have emotions, and then certainly ideally helped how to manage those emotions until we grow up and can manage them ourselves. But if you walk away from childhood feeling like, yeah, I think a lot of crazy shit and I have a lot of crazy emotions, but so does everyone else. That doesn't make me weird or odd or atypical. Then you're going to be more comfortable with your frailties. And if you are more comfortable with your frailties, you can own your faults and you can own your errors and you can say, I am guilty of this error. And then you can make amends. Shame is often folks who lack that sense of twinship. So they feel like they are the odd man out, that their emotions are atypical, unwarranted, unexcusable, and they feel shamed by it. And that becomes a secret thing. Whereas guilt can be admitted to those who are wronged and you can correct it. Whereas shame is a secretive thing.
Some of the defenses against shame when there's excessive shame, because shame can be very painful to the ego. And we do have the tendency to develop coping mechanisms to try to either avoid or deflect it. And so
luckily, David and I are shameless, as evidenced by having a podcast.
right? Nathanson had a compass of shame to describe 4 common reactions. It's worth talking about so people can understand that, especially to be able to identify in other people when you see that. One being withdrawal, shutting down socially to try to escape feeling exposed, avoiding others, hiding. Another one being attacking the self, internalizing that blame, saying, yes, I am awful to appease others, can often lead to excessive people pleasing or self-criticism. Avoidance altogether, so denying that the shame, seeking to mask it, or with distractions or pride. This one is often used with substance use and addiction, so we see that quite often, unfortunately, in populations that we treat. And then in this one, I think is maybe most interesting is attacking others. So rejecting the shame by turning the tables on others, lashing out with blame or contempt to feel superior. Those last 2 strategies are probably the most destructive of them all. I mean, they're all destructive, but those 2, the complete avoidance into something else like substances or starting to attack others because of your own shame, just deflect it.
That latter one, yeah. And that latter one's absolutely politically relevant right now.
Mm-hmm.
And what I will say before we go any farther, if any of our tens of listeners are struggling with shame, certainly the intent of this episode and what we're talking about is not to demean the shame that you're experiencing on an individual level. We're talking about more of a societal shift and how it impacts the nation as a whole. So if you are struggling with these things, we're not necessarily talking about you specifically on this.
No. And one of the key goals in therapy on the individual level, though, is to turn that excessive shame that's toxic into that healthier guilt and accountability. So we got to remember the accountability part of it. So guilt alone without accountability isn't necessarily as helpful. Being able to say, yeah, sometimes I do bad things. It doesn't necessarily make me a bad person. We've spoken about cognitive dissonance a lot, so we won't rehash, but the ability to empathize, that accountability is a huge part of being able to empathize, being able to apologize, being able to have good relationships with people, to say I can't be perfect all the time, but I can definitely try to fix and amend and make things better and improve. If the goal is to just brush it off and then keep doing bad things, well, that's not really accountability.
Well, and also in psychotherapy, critical element of this, I'll get ready to drink because I have a quote. Drink. Paul Tillich, who's an American theologian, and this is actually one of my favorite psychotherapy-related quotes, is he said, grace is coming to understand that you will be accepted even though you are unacceptable. And part of psychotherapy is certainly coming to be able to reveal your shame to another human and find that you're not as unacceptable as you think you are. And that's an important clinical component. I also think it's an important element of why we are where we are, that there was an important shift starting maybe, I don't know when Facebook came out. What was that? 2008, 7, 6, whatever. So earlier, the platforms
2004.
4, no kidding.
I mean, it was released to the public in 2006.
Wow. Okay. So the platforms that have developed, social media platforms, has led to a cultural shift where radical transparency, oversharing has become, if not the norm, darn close to it. And this desire to repent, this desire to confess that when you're struggling with shame, that it comes is part and parcel of that. You want someone to see you. And social media platforms have allowed this opportunity to publicly confess and under the guise of radical transparency or whatever. And you can get a short-term validation from that. The likes, the supportive comments, that can make someone feel in the short term much better about themselves. They can feel their shame diminish briefly, but it comes back. I mean, the research also says that no time in history have people felt more alone, isolated, and most people who share things have had the experience of oversharing, where they regret what they've shared. You click the send button at 2 a.m, and you wake up with a sick feeling in your stomach because oh my God, what did I say? And that has led to a societal shift that I think is relevant and I think is having an impact politically and nationally.
The research that's been looked at, peer research polls have shown that at least 1 in 10 people have posted things that they've later regretted. It's actually higher in that 18 to 29 range, which is triple the rate of those who are over 50. The ability to share has been easier.
Yeah.
The younger generations are much more used to it. They have better access to it. We're all connected all the time. I don't want to dismiss some of the positives that have come from some of these changes.
I will. You can validate them. I will dismiss them.
Okay, perfect. I want to bring up that a big change in the ability to share more of these things is that more people feel comfortable sharing some of these things that were stigmatized in the past, mental health issues, LGBTQ, identity, things like that, stuff that was otherwise considered shameful is no longer. And so there is some benefit, right? There is some societal benefit to opening up the doors to allow more discussion to be had. But what you mentioned, and this is nuance, and I think it's something that people will struggle with if they don't understand that, is that sharing blankly to a bunch of strangers may have a short-term good feeling that you can later regret, is leading to a lot of loneliness, is leading to people feeling withdrawn. Whereas the ability to open up and have these discussions on a one-to-one basis, on a personal level, to be able to actually have the conversations more openly with people that you love and care about and know, love, and care about you and respect you and can reciprocate, that's a very different conversation, but that's not what social media is doing. And so, yes, it's very good that the culture is shifting to allow these topics that were otherwise considered taboo before to happen. That's great. But the way that we're doing it isn't proving to be healthier. I don't want to say that it's terrible that people are having those conversations. It's just that we're not finding the best way to have those conversations yet. Is that a fair way to say it?
Well, and you make God damn it, David. I hate it when you make good points. It destroys
brought
my
to you by
faith
Crow
in
86, Jim Beam Distillery.
Jim Beam Distillery, specializing in Old Crow bourbon and good ideas. There has been some benefits to social media, and it has taken individuals who otherwise would have been very isolated and allowed them to find a community to support them. So in the past, there are certain, you mentioned LGBT, but they may have been incredibly isolated in their communities, and then they could find a different community, and that has been a godsend and wonderful for that population. We're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. However, law of unintended consequences. I think the stated intent for social media was exactly that they were going to bring us together. I personally trace this back to the original reality TV show, The Real World, and blame much of today's situation on MTV and The Real World.
Are you allowed to say things like that without a cane in hand?
So
it's those darn kids and their rock and roll music.
And the rock and roll music. No, it wasn't the rock and roll music. Right. At this point in my life, I have to choose one or the other. I can't do both on the same day. I've got to take a rest. But no, I'm not blaming the rock and roll. I'm actually just drawing a through line between the advent of reality TV, where all of a sudden a small group were willing to show their entire life, radically reveal, radical honesty, and on camera to the world, and it sensitized us. And I think, I mean, for so many folks watching that, you'd watch them and they all had that moment in which they made their big revelations. That was kind of what the real world was all around. It was having these emotional moments in which each one of them in turn shared their life trauma. And some of them was pretty pathetic. It was, like my dog died when I was 9. I'm like, oh, was it a puppy? No, it was 27 years old. It's actually in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most long-lived dog. And that's when I lost Gammy. Oh, your grandmother died. How old was she? 110. Yeah, that's what happens to 110 years old. Anyway, yeah, some of them was pretty weak, what their trauma was, but we started seeing this, and there was that confessional nature. There was a cathartic quality to it, and that built right into social media. And now we have outsourced reality TV to everyone with a social media feed. Everyone has their own reality TV show. Let's face it. Why are people on Facebook? It's not to see baby pictures, guys. No one wants to see your kids.
No, it's to subscribe to our channel. Go ahead and smash that subscribe button, hit likes. Give us throw us a shout out. Answer today's poll.
Right.
Give a thumbs up to our latest video.
Yeah, no one's there to see baby pictures. I'm sorry. I know your child is magical to you because I know how I felt about mine. That's not why people do Facebook. They do Facebook for the real life drama that happens on Facebook every day. It's the arguments, it's the over reveal, it's the weird fights that kick off in public. That's what brings people back. And if people are being truly honest, they're disappointed if they scroll through Facebook and they're not finding one good juicy battle going on. It's reality TV that has been offloaded to the social media world. And that's why we're there. And people are doing it. They are doing their own confessionals as part of the feed.
When somebody goes online and shares their rawest emotions to everybody on the internet, live streams that meltdown, one of the problems is that we're really not wired to be able to do that in that setting. The internet lacks that reciprocity and that trust that makes that sharing so constructive. That's what I was getting at, is that to be able to do that with somebody that can sit there with you and share that experience, and you can feel that, and you can feel safe and have them empathize with you in real time, in person. And to be honest, I've done a ton of telehealth. I found it works very well. But the key is that connection. It's to have another human being sit there and be able to get it.
A confession without a confessor is meaningless.
Yeah, it doesn't help you build that sense that you've just accomplished something through it. I had many patients who have shared with me things that they've never said to anybody, and it's such a freeing thing. The same thing is happening online, and they're feeling the opposite. They're feeling naked, vulnerable, and there's a reason, because with all the supportive people, one, it's so empty. It's, you go, girl. Good job. Oh, that sounds terrible.
Heart emoji.
At the same time, people who have that tendency to do that are also getting attacked. The most heinous, terrible things to say to somebody who's opening up. If you're going to hear it, you're going to hear it on Facebook. You're going to read it,
Absolutely.
I suppose. What a miserable place to share your rawest emotion.
A cold place to do it. So how about let's get back to this big, thick chart of ours for Uncle Sam.
For the last about 50 years, that shame and that guilt, that glue, as you said, that's been holding all of this together, it's been melting away. One of the things that's been contributing, one of them is social media. But it's been happening before that. This was happening prior to 2004, 2006. The research from the University of Houston has compiled 50 years of data and showed that the scandals really don't hit us like they used to. In the early 1970s, pretty much anybody who was implicated in Watergate resigned or was impeached and gone.
Yes.
Nowadays isn't happening, and it's actually been less and less. So we know that social media is playing a role, but gosh, what else? What's affecting Uncle Sam so greatly?
Right.
249 years old.
Okay. I have a theory, and ignorance
You're
of a
gonna
subject
listen to it.
right. Ignorance of a subject has never stopped me from having a well-formulated opinion on it. So
That's what the bourbon's for.
right, exactly.
We're going to loosen that up and we're going to share it with the world.
Yeah. Here's my confessional, folks. So I think that it actually is mass media that has now been distilled down to social media. The skillful use of mass media has ended up prioritizing scandal as a political tool or weapon. And when you use a weapon too much, it blunts. So my sense is that as we became more and more enamored or more and more inundated with mass media, basically television, and newspapers took work, you had to read them, but mass media, that these scandals have hit on a frequency, and we could probably Google this, the frequency of scandal. But I think the frequency of scandal increased dramatically, and we became numb to it. So, I can trace through my life, starting, I guess, Watergate, although contrary to David's perception of my age, I was an infant at that time.
So you say.
That was a big deal. That was a massive deal. And the parties weren't willing to bend. They said, no, you've done wrong, and we're holding you accountable to this. And everyone was affected. But then as we progress through the 70s, 80s, the scandals were just so common. And then I think a watershed moment was actually Bill Clinton. That Clinton in the White House, Monica Lewinsky, that would have killed most politicians, absolutely destroyed them, and it didn't him. They just have continued, and both parties kind of use them on an equal basis. Nobody's more guilty of this than the other. And I think that's actually driven some of this. I was blaming social media as if it was the only factor. I'm trying to determine whether, and this is a chicken the egg question, has societal changes driven our politicians to become more shameless? Or has shameless politicians set a tone that have driven the general population? Is it top down or bottom up? And I think it's a little bit of both, but the frequency of scandals have driven politicians toward the shameless.
I don't know that you could squarely hang this on either one of them. They feed off of one another. It's this terrible cycle. It's a feed-forward system. I agree with you absolutely that mass media has made a huge difference. I think there's important points to all of this. And again, it's nuance. And nuance is something that our brains don't want, but it's so
propaganda
important.
taught us that.
Exactly. But it's so important to really understand our world, to understand what has brought us to where we are. I don't know that we're going to be able to do it complete justice, but just some highlights. When you have media used the way that it was and the escalation of that over time, you had more exposure to cultural factors that were otherwise considered shameful prior to that. The more exposure that you have to anything, the more used to it you get. It's why maybe the first time you hear a song, you're like, it's whatever. And then once it's played 19,000 times in the background, your kids are playing it, you're like, baby shark, shark, shark. Yeah, you're doing it yourself.
I thought you were going to do Right Said Fred, I'm Too Sexy.
Well, that was also a terrible song, but you heard it so many times that it becomes normalized. And to the point
and
that
you're
it becomes...
singing it to yourself.
I'm singing it to myself now, you asshole.
It's my walk-in music.
Thanks, jackass. Yeah, that happens to everybody. That certainly has happened to the nation. And the media gave you more of a shift in the way that we viewed things that were shameful. If we look at the vintage 1950s ads, don't let them call you skinny would be something they would have used to sell weight gain supplements. An ad that said, without the right deodorant, one's physical appeal is rendered worthless. You never could have...
Those are shameful now.
Both of those were so heavily entrenched in shame. They were selling from the other side of it. Could you imagine a company now? They would be canceled so quick if they put out an ad.
Rightly so.
That. Yeah. Well, right. Yeah, absolutely. But that's the shift, is that what was considered taboo isn't. And it's our exposure to those things. And in so many ways, there's a lot of good to that. I got to bring back more time, more exposure to the understanding of mental illness. Taylor Tomlinson, if you've ever watched her stuff, she's really funny. But she has this...
Taylor, you're invited on the show. Invite her on the show.
My God, I would love... She is invited on the show. Taylor Tomlinson, please come on the show. No, she has this great joke. And I don't know how much of a joke it is, but when she was growing up, and she's maybe a bit younger than me, but she went to her dad and said, Dad, I think I'm depressed. And he said, well, maybe you just need to have a spoonful of peanut butter. Just a little bit of protein we'll make that better. Because there was a time you just didn't have those conversations with your parents. You just didn't have the conversations with anybody if you were feeling depressed. But now you can. Now you do. Seeking therapy. You didn't tell anybody you were going to see a therapist. That was the worst possible thing, addiction recovery. You couldn't tell somebody that you were struggling with addiction. Coming from a non-traditional family, those weren't being a survivor of abuse. These were all topics that were just so outside of the realm of things we talk about. But now we can. And so there's been this great shift to allow that. I think that right there was what allowed Clinton to survive his scandal, was that people didn't view it the same way they viewed Watergate.
No.
Now, there's a huge other part of this, which is partisanship. We'll talk about that. But they wanted to view it through the lens of he had a personal issue that was sexual in nature, and what happens between a man and his mistress when he's
Under
is
oath?
none of our business, right? That's what really allowed him to survive. But even then, he still apologized. And that's not to say, and he did profusely, but people viewed it as, wow, this is really a personal issue for him. We're going to let it go. But I agree with you that partisanship is what allowed him to survive it. People used that, but that exposure to that was definitely a door opening.
And that is kind of the birthplace of the hyper partisanship that has done nothing but escalate since that point. And yes, I mean, we're at a point now that there is no right and wrong, there is red and blue. And for at least political behaviors in our own personal lives, we still have right and wrong. And that is problematic. I guess where I'm concerned, and you make a lovely and valid point.
To this day, in my family, there is a rule that you can't say blowjob at the Thanksgiving dinner table because of that.
David, I think that's a rule for everyone.
But at that time,
I mean, just in general,
it was just a blowjob, and that turned into a thing. But now there's a rule. There's a standing rule in our household. You can't say blowjob at the dinner table.
New rule, everybody. I'm going to support this one, whoever came up with it. I don't think that has a place around the dinner table anyway.
This rule gets brought up all the damn time, often at the dinner table.
Yeah.
But because of that scandal, that was the birth of the hyperpartisanship, but also the normalization of that. The shame wasn't there anymore. People saying, so what? Who cared? On one side. The beef on the other side was that he lied. It wasn't,
Well, it shifted to that. It started with he's an adulterer. Now, what it should have been is he's a predator. He took advantage of a young girl. But
we weren't, society hadn't come that far yet. We weren't there yet.
We had not come that far.
Now, that is true. No, you're absolutely right. That is 100% what it should have been. We weren't there.
No, as a society, and that our sense of shame shifts with society. But you make a really valid point that, to someone who is listening, I'm making a through line that says all of it is bad, but it's not. It's nuanced. There's many things that have come with shifting our sense of what is shameful, which is very positive, very positive. What I'm most concerned about really, though, is this social glue piece. I've spent most of my life utterly unaware of how much of our democracy is based on norms and unspoken rules. It never occurred to me, and there was no precedence that made me think of it, was that so much of our democracy is based on gentlemen and gentlewoman handshake agreements that this is how we're going to behave. And as shamelessness has died and politicians are taking more advantage of being shameless, in fact, that is part of their selling point, that I am shameless, that glue that has held our democracy together does feel like it is withering a bit. And the efforts to push the norms are also pushing our democracy farther and farther away from what at least I have come to accept or believe that our democracy was meant to be and designed to be.
What do you make of the observation that you're starting to see with this hyper-partisanship that's happening? These societal norms are starting to fall into different subgroups where you have two different sides, and one side will look at something as being very faux pas for one reason, and the other side looking at it as being either completely acceptable or very faux pas for a completely different reason. And they're really separating themselves into groups. So an example would be during COVID-19 with mask wearing. You had two different groups where on one side, wearing a mask was seen as the right thing to do. You had to do it. In fact, you were going to shame people who weren't wearing a mask. And then on the other side, you had the exact opposite. Wearing a mask was completely shameful, and you were going to shame people for wearing masks. How do you view that?
We view it as the progression of our politics, which has drifted increasingly away from policy and more to culture wars.
Tribalism?
The curiosity that I would have is, and this is similar to our discussion about, Testo Rage Max.
Where you buy your testosterone and energy drinks. Bourbon Bull Sweat.
We talked there that it's not political ideology that's drawing these young men. It's a cultural ideology. It's a cultural connection. Politicians have discovered that talking policy bores the shit out of people. They don't want to hear the nuances of policy. They don't care about the white papers that candidates post on their websites. They do not care. What they care about viscerally, what really hits them in their feels from a propaganda standpoint, is the culture stuff. So what I'd be curious about is that, I know how these folks are identifying politically, and that's shaping their behaviors. But in their personal life, what are their values? Because I don't think we end up justifying things that are contrary to our values. And I suppose if you justify behavior that's contrary to your values long enough, it becomes part of your value set. It alters your behavior. That's the concern. That's the glue that I'm talking about from a societal, nationalist democracy standpoint, that as these kinds of divides are taken advantage of politically on both sides, that it does end up shifting society. And it's shifting it in a direction. It's not the value set, because I think fundamentally, like when I talk to my neighbors, regardless of what posters they put in their yards and who they want elected for president, value-wise, we are incredibly similar. We care about the same things. We care about our kids. We care about the community. We care about local crime. We care about the potholes. We care about the same things. So I think we still share the same values. But boy, get on Facebook and all of a sudden the value shift is remarkable, and it has nothing to do with really anything but feeling.
Hey, it's Rob from Shrink the Nation. As my friend David so eloquently states at the beginning of the show, we are clinicians, but we're not your clinician. We love to joke around and dive into the tough topics, but there's something really important we need to say. If you're struggling with your mental health or facing substance use issues, we want you to know you're not alone. We have dedicated our professional careers to mental health, and we care deeply about it. It's okay to ask for help. Reaching out to a professional in your area could be the first step toward feeling better. Don't wait. There's support out there, and it works. Please take that first step. We want you to be well. Now let's get back to the show. Oh, and don't tell David I said he was eloquent. He'll be insufferable.
As we've had people who felt more and more comfortable speaking about things that were previously considered shameful, that erosion of shame over time, you get more people who are less worried about being considered hypocrites, which previously would have been a complete career killer for any politician. As that grows, when you have politicians get to this point where nobody's afraid of being considered a hypocrite, they'll say one thing and do the opposite right there. And they do that so frequently that the people who follow them get so numb to it, and they assume that it's all performative. He doesn't mean that. It's gotten to the point where when you hear a politician talk, do you believe anything that they say unless it's something you want to hear? We'll only believe the parts of their speech that speak to us, and then we ignore all of the rest as being, probably didn't mean that. That doesn't seem okay, but that seems like where we're at.
Well, we're in a post-policy existence, that there is no consistency to policy any longer. There is no predictability as to what the right or the left necessarily stand for. There's no through line. It looks nothing like it looked even 10 years ago. 20 years ago, definitely. Utter shifts in policy. Slays me how much the news media hinges on the words that people say when the words that people say no longer seem to carry any long-term meaning. And you're right, absolutely, that when you're listening to someone you support, you hear what they say that you support, and you're already building in an excuse for the things that you don't support. You're already getting ready to use they're playing four-dimensional chess analogy when it comes to that. When I was younger, being a waffler, being a flip-flopper was the death knell to a politician. And now, not so much so. That politicians utilize shamelessness as a weapon now. They double down, or they'll use it as a badge of honor. They'll do a video in which they confess what they've done and move forward without really truly making amends. It's the confession that matters, not the change in behavior that matters.
Before we got to this, because this is definitely a shift. If we go back just a few years and we look at the point where shamelessness really started to take hold, there is some societal backlash to it. When societal norms, customs, and courtesies that are the only glue holding together everything. What tries to hold it together at that point? When shame stops biting, law and mobs step in. So pick your poison. Shame and guilt have always been the soft guidelines. Those are the soft boundaries. Those are the things that we say, I'm not going to cross that because I don't want to feel bad for it, or I don't want somebody else to call me out. But once I stop caring about that and I start pushing the envelope and I do it enough that it starts causing issues, then other people come in. And that's where you had course correction in some ways. And then I think an overcorrection. You had the hashtag #MeToo movement. I think that's important to talk about. You had where it had obviously gone too far. We had way too many situations where sexual harassment, sexual assault, sexual abuse were being forgiven, ignored, not addressed, to the point where people stood up and said, no more. They called it out. On the overcorrection, then you had the cancel culture, where all of a sudden, if you were even perceived to have done something wrong, you were getting shut down and canceled. That's not to say that everyone who was canceled did deserve it. Not at all. Plenty of people who've been canceled who absolutely should have been canceled. But it's really difficult to say that 100% of the people who have been canceled definitely deserved to be canceled. Is that an unfair statement?
It's a completely fair statement. This has been more an issue. I was going to say it's more an issue of the left.
Where's Allison?
But
God damn it.
Yeah, I don't know, honestly, if that's entirely the case, because the right does plenty of canceling. It's just canceled for different reasons. They cancel if you're not conservative enough in the basis of not policy, but culture war basis. And they cancel a lot of their very effective politicians, their more effective leaders. And then on the left, Me Too movement absolutely was marked, particularly in the tail end, which is why it ended up losing steam, because it went too far. And it set the bar at a 99.9% and started canceling people and calling people hypocrites if they didn't go far enough with the mob. And mobs often do this. I mean, mobs go too far always. And, you know, the great thing about being in a mob is you become utterly shameless.
Well, I don't know if that's a great part about it, but that is a feature of it.
Oh, it's a feature.
It's the protective factor
if
of
you've
it.
ever been part of a mob, it feels good.
I've not been part of I've not been part of a mob to be. Yeah.
My
or at least
misspent youth.
Maybe not. Yeah. Unfortunately, I haven't been. But that's why I bring that up, is that now you have, because of how far that went, because of the push of that cancel culture, at least on the left, now you have politicians who are playing off of that, and they've built very strong political positions by fighting that cancel culture. So you had this pendulum swing in one direction, overcorrect, and then gave a lot of power to one side because of that, which I think is fascinating. It's really interesting to see that. It's all predicated on shame. It's all predicated on a lack thereof.
When I look at specific politicians that seem to have capitalized on shamelessness, a majority of them, it comes due eventually. I'm thinking like Bob Menendez, Democratic senator from New Jersey. The guy was embroiled in scandal after scandal, bribery scandals, being given gold bars, just ridiculously over the top, scandalous behavior that he was caught dead to rights for. And he absolutely was shameless about it. He doubled down. He'd run again, and he was rewarded for it for a time. I believe he's in federal prison now. So that,
Well,
it
2015,
catches
yeah,
up
he
to
had a
you.
corruption indictment in 2015, and their trial ended a hung jury, and then he was indicted again in 2023, and then on bribery charge, but he had gold bars and cash envelopes. So that one a little bit harder to get out
Yeah.
of. Yeah.
I mean, he was dead to rights, and he just doubled down and refused to be shamed by it. And another one that on the other side that always struck as extra shameless was Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz was just utterly shameless in his way of just doubling down. I saw an interview with him where he outright said, "My personal life would have been utterly unacceptable at any other time." Eventually, though, those things do catch up with you. The emperor has no clothes. There's no substance under the shamelessness. There's a ton of examples of folks either accepting jobs that they're not qualified for, but that's an element of shamelessness. Accepting a job that you really do not have the qualifications for is a shameless act.
In order for them to survive, that requires a couple of things. One was hyperpartisanship.
Yes.
Being in a political environment that you only need one side to agree with you. And when you can frame any scandal as a partisan attack, which is really commonly used, just to say, well, it's just an attack from the other side, to say they're shameless. How dare they? How dare they?
Exactly.
How dare they accuse me of having all of these gold bars from whatever country?
Right.
I made these myself. Every attack is a shameless partisan attack when somebody is accused. Even if somebody has been tried in a court, just a regular court with a jury that has been selected the regular way,
With input from the defense.
it's a partisan attack. But shame requires a community consensus. And that's what I was getting at before,
Yes.
is that in order for somebody to feel shame, the community has to agree with that. And we have
I'm
built up.
going to disagree with you.
Okay, but let me finish, and then you disagree. In order for shame politically to take you out, your community has to agree that it's shameful. And in this environment, as long as you are on one side and not the other, you are shameless because
Yes.
they will protect you from anything that is considered shameful.
All right. I'm feeling shame right now because I cut you off, and actually I'm not going to correct you.
Yeah.
You were absolutely on point.
Yeah.
Um,
But case in point, we get all the time on our Facebook feed, we get attacked as being hardcore left, libtard, Democrat, all this, while simultaneously being called MAGA and all this stuff. Like, we both sides come at us,
Winning.
claws out, teeth, they just come at us hard. And we have to let people know, it's called balance. We're not here to pick a side. That's not what we're doing. We're calling everybody on their bullshit, which is what everybody's doing. It's all bullshit. When you protect your Bob Menendez for all of his bullshit, it's bullshit. When you protect Matt Gaetz for all of his bullshit, it's bullshit. When you call every critique on you when you do something illegal a partisan attack, that's bullshit. It's complete, utter bullshit. You are tribalizing your political views for gain, and you are being used as a pawn. Everybody is. Both sides.
How we're using the term political. There was a time political reference policy, and we on this show have never talked policy, not a single time. We have never weighed in on a policy. We've never advocated for a policy, and we've never argued against a policy. We're talking about something completely different. But what you see on Facebook, although the fact that we kind of get equally attacked from both sides tells me that we're winning. That's exactly what we're looking
it's really
for.
funny because we allude, I suppose, to politics because we talk about the people. We talk about the people who are in those roles, which you kind of have to do if you're talking about the culture of the nation. And that's, at least from the perspective we're talking about Uncle Sam. We're talking about who's in power, who's in charge. Well, that's politics. That's who is running our country. It's the people. It's what they're doing.
Yes.
It's not the policies.
We're out, or they, maybe we, maybe I I don't know. That's for the external observer, but they're outsourcing their shame. Shame is really a thing that should be an internal modulator. Shame prevents us from doing wrong. Shame is our super ego snapping into place, saying, nope, don't do that. They are outsourcing their shame in exchange for public guilt. And what we're not doing is we're not rendering them guilty. We're giving them a pass. So they don't have to have shame. They can outsource it to the population. And as long as it falls on the right side of the partisan lines, there's no guilt. And if there's no guilt, then they would be stupid for being shameful. And that's what they'll say. The ones that are the best at it say they're just dumb for them to be ruled by their shame. What they're ruled by is whether they get elected or not.
When the public expects their politicians to be shameless, they really just stop bother shaming them. There's no sense. Why? We expect you to be shameless. We're not going to hold you accountable. Democracy does run much smoother when most actors restrain themselves voluntarily out of the respect for norms. I've had this thought several times while we've been talking, because we keep mentioning a time where this really was winning the day. Are we trying to hold on to something that just can't work? Are we trying to hold on to a past that just wasn't going to be successful? Both of us remember an Uncle Sam that had a set of ideals that was forged out of a democracy that worked a certain way. And just like anybody, any culture, that does change over time. And we've been able to identify the pros to it. We've been able to identify the cons. Now, we're remembering the past probably through rose-colored lenses.
Childhood lenses.
Well, for me, but for you, elderly, crippled adult, 100-something.
Bifocals.
But we're remembering the good, and we're not remembering the bad there. We're looking at some pros now. We're looking at a lot of cons. So what if we go back, let's take ourselves back 30, 40 years. What were the challenges? What were the negative parts of this is how it was run? Do we miss that? Are we glad that that's gone, or are we better off with it?
I think in microcosm, we are now debating the tension between the conservative and the progressive. And I believe we have talked both sides of that from a conservative standpoint, which is basically the past worked. We had success. Slow down there, young whippersnapper. Let's not get out ahead of ourselves. And we've talked that this death of shame is kind of
what you just said was that the progressive stance is to slow down.
No.
Keep things the way they were. Oh, I thought you said okay.
Stance. No, the conservative stance is slow down. The past worked. Let's not break it. Whereas the progressive stance is identifying the problems of the moment and saying, well, we need to fix and we need to fix and we need to fix. Now, if we step back from this and actually look at it with any science, they're about 50% wrong at any given time. That the progression means doing things differently, which has downstream consequences we can never prevent. Conservative means doing things the same way, which means never fixing what needs to be fixed. Both are wrong and both are right. And that's where we're struggling right now, is that there have been good in this, and certain elements of shame should have been done away with. And we've made some progression there. Certain elements of shame should not have been done away with. And we're losing ground there. And unfortunately, we sit at a juncture in which we're in flux. It hasn't stabilized yet. We don't know where we're going to end up. That this is a societal shift that we just don't know how it'll play out. And it's anxiety provoking. And I think there's value in identifying, as you did, the good side, because I was all about being like the curmudgeonly old man shaking my cane at everyone, telling them, when I was a kid, we did it the right way. But there is nuance to that. And, I can go back 30 years in my thinking, and I can think about the problems that we had at that moment in time. And no, nothing was perfect. And nothing was perfect 40 years ago. In fact, 40 years ago, I spent every day of my life expecting the end of the world by nuclear Armageddon. So it was not perfect by any means. The strides that we have made in terms of equality across the board, any zone that you want to look at, the one place we've lost steam, though, is equality in terms of economic equality. The divide has increased. The top earners earners and the bottom earners have lengthened by a long shot. Anyway, probably a different episode, different time. But
I think where we're at right now, at least in this episode, is we're at a perfect spot to talk about prescriptions. And with the caveat saying, almost certainly have to revisit this topic. We got to circle back around. We got to listen to this. We got to say, oh, right, what did we miss? Which is a lot, which we always do anyway. But for the time being, let's put a pin in where we're at now. Let's throw some prescriptions out there. And I think we need to do some for the individual and the nation.
Okay. On the individual level, stop going into public in pajama pants and slippers. Don't do it. It's shameless. And I am personally going to start calling people out. And I encourage our tens of listeners to do the same.
If you see a grumpy old man with a cane shaking it at you from across the parking lot, yelling something you don't understand because your iPods are in, just ignore him. That's rough.
Well, that's exactly going to be the outcome. Yeah, that'll be the outcome. The iPods are in. But yeah, come on.
AirPods.
Fleecy AirPods, whatever.
I said iPods. That's how old I am. Your iPods are in your ears. Yeah. You've got the internets on your brain.
Yeah. So no, on a more actually probably doable standpoint, because I don't think I'm going to get people to stop going into public in their sleepwear, is when you post, ask yourself, am I confessing? Am I performing, or am I connecting? And that's a question you should, before you click that button, you got to understand what your intent is in clicking that button. If it's confession, then that's probably not, you need a confessor, as David said. You need somebody who is there, who can empathize with you in that moment, who can see you, can actually see you as a human in that moment and connect with you in order to feel like you have confessed. So ponder those questions. And if you're performing, go for it. Everyone needs drama on Facebook.
Follow us on Facebook, X, Blue Sky, TikTok, YouTube, Insta. For the people, practice a 24-hour rule before posting. If you're about to post something highly personal, inflammatory, or confessional, give yourself that cooling off period. Write it in a note or a draft. Wait a day, at least a few hours, and then revisit. Just decide before you post it whether it's actually worth putting out there so that you're not doing the 2 a.m. rant that you're then regretting at 8 a.m.
It's a reasonable one. For the population, for the nation, this is an individual thing that will translate into a national thing. I encourage everyone to actually write down what their values are. Write your value set, what's important to you truly, and what's important to you when you talk to your neighbors, when you talk to your kids. What is important to you? And then laminate that and hold yourself accountable to it. Hold your politicians accountable to it. That they can't be shameless if we don't guilt them. If there are not consequences, then shamelessness continues. So establish what your values are so that it's not something that's established for you by the propaganda and by how you feel in the moment.
For the leaders and institutions, my prescription is, sadly to say, I think a silly one. I would love for it to be a real one, but have our leaders adopt a voluntary norms pledge of accountability before they start their term. A pledge that if they're credibly accused of wrongdoing, they will cooperate with investigations, not attack whistleblowers, step aside from duties if the public's trust is too damaged. That way we can actually begin to retrust our politicians. It's silly. I don't know that anybody would actually do that, but it would be great if we could at least say, hey, you made this pledge, hold yourself to it. That's my national one. Now, maybe my real one is this. Vote. Go out there, and when you vote based off of your, as Rob just said, write down your values, write down your morals, your ethics. Look up the people you're actually voting for. Do a little bit of research. Take just a little bit of time that it takes to understand who it is that you're voting for. Look up their history. Look it up from multiple sources. Figure out, is this somebody who espouses what you want, not what your party wants, not what somebody else is telling you, but what you want to attach your name to, because this is the person you are voting for.
You're signing off and partially responsible for everything that happens for that politician you vote for. Yeah. So I'm feeling like none of those are going to get taken to the pharmacy, but please stay out of public in your fleece pants and slippers.
I hear you. Well, thank you to everybody who's stayed around this long. We really appreciate you. Please send us your comments, socials at shrinkthenation.com. We do have a weekly newsletter. So you can go to our website, shrinkthenation.com, and sign up for the newsletter. We're putting that out every Friday. Go to our socials. Check them out. If you want to see people accuse us of being hyper-partisan on both sides, yeah, do it. We try to answer all questions that we get. We try to engage with anybody who's willing to engage with us as long as it's reasonable. If you spam the accounts, you're going to get blocked. If you post racist, hateful, horrible crap, you're going to get reported and blocked. But other than that, get in there, say something. We'll try to respond if we can, and look for us.
We do have an anonymous means of contacting us. You don't have to share your email. You don't have to share your name. Send us your questions. Send us your concerns, your critiques. Send us your recipes. Whatever you want to send us, you can do it without us actually having any way to trace it back to you. We'd love to answer more questions on air.
To any distillery who would like to be featured on our show, reach out and reach tens of listeners every week. Hit us up. We'll gladly accept your bourbon or your coffee or your insults. We don't really have a leg to stand on either way. But in a couple of years when we're big, when we are big, then you'll want us.
Yep, you'll regret not getting in on the bottom floor. Or that's basement, right. where we're actually living now.
We are sub-basement, but we will be there soon. Yeah, Mom's basement. So, all right. Well, I think that's it for the show today. Thanks, Rob. Up next week, or actually not even next week. I think we're gonna have a bonus episode here soon with where Allison will be back. So we'll get that posted as soon as we get it, and we'll have this one up. So, all right, roll the music. We're out. Adios.